is worth talking about, because this is spoilers, by the way. If you do not want spoilers, then please click off now, because this is going to be spoilery. All right, so we have this. Prince Renethal says, countless ages ago, just after the first Venthyr was sired, Nathrezim unveiled another creation, the Nathrezim. Forged to be the ultimate infiltrators, they bore the influence of death into the realms of our rivals, as well as the worlds of the living. Despite their subtlety, one of these incursions was discovered. In response, the full wrath of the light fell upon Revendreth, setting ablaze the ward once held by the Nathrezim. This is huge, right? Now, we've always known that it was Sire Nathrezim that made the Nathrezim. This is sort of, well, I say no, we had very strong guesses around this. Of course, the very reason for their development, that was sort of guessed upon, right? And enemy infiltration obviously pointed out a lot in terms of how exactly they infiltrated all of these different zones. But this is very interesting, right? Because we know that the light claimed the reason they attacked Revendreth was because of some sort of slight against the light. We now learn that this was most likely because of Lord Thraxian. Do you guys remember Lord Thraxian? Please tell me you guys remember who the fuck Lord Thraxian is. Lord Thraxian is the light Nathrezim, right? He is the guy that is working with the light Dreadlord, yes. The full light, wrath of the light fell upon Revendreth. The armies, now here's where things for me get very, very interesting. The armies of Maldraxxus did not rise up to defend us, so the Stone Right carved her Stone Legion to strike back against the light. This is where things get really interesting for me. This is sort of the first lie in the big scheme of lies that is the Shadowlands. Maldraxxus literally exists to defend the Shadowlands. That is its literal definition. It's the literal reason Maldraxxus was created in the first place, was to be the defenders of the Shadowlands. And yet, when the light led their incursion into Revendreth, Maldraxxus did not rise up to defend them, and it was the Stone Right that had to carve her Stone Legion in order to get the light back. Once the Naru were routed, the Stone Right turned her anger upon the Nathrezim, blaming them for the loss of so many of her children. The conflict was ended by Nathrezim, who said he would exile them to a world beyond the Shadowlands. Nathrezim never told me what became of the Nathrezim. Only later did I learn that mortal souls had come to know them by another name, the Dreadlords. Now, of course, this is where I think speculation juices sort of start taking over. Now, I do want to make clear that Alpocalypse is very unhappy about this, because he does view this as a retcon, whereas I do not. I do not think that this is a retcon. I genuinely believe that this could point to two different things, right? So it could be that for a while, or for a rather long time, Nathrezim wasn't working with Zuval, right? So Nathrezim was in fact, because basically the retcon that exists here is we had Dreadlords, actual Nathrezim, working against Ner'zhul and Arthas, right? So we know that they were working against Ner'zhul, they were working against Arthas, and therefore by proxy, they would have been the ones who worked against the Jailer. But of course, if Nathrezim is in league with the Jailer, then why would they be working against the Jailer? Well, this could signal that Nathrezim wasn't always in service of the Jailer, and that for a time he did actually oppose the Jailer, and then later only decided to join the fold. Or it could be that not all of the Nathrezim followed in Nathrezim's footsteps. not all of the Nathrezim served Denathrius. Some of them sort of moved on to other things, and they started working for whoever was the highest bidder at the time. And we've said this before, even before we knew anything about the Nathrezim. One of my biggest sort of things about the Nathrezim is that they do not seem to pledge loyalty to anyone. They seem to do whatever, whatever is good for them at the time. Now, there is something very interesting about the light here, however, that I want to point out. The light discovers Lothraxion has invaded them, right? Discovers that that Lothraxion have sort of invaded their armies. And instead of exiling him or killing him, the light subdues him. They turn him into their own soldier. That sort of just goes to show the, I guess you could say, the maliciousness or the benevolence, depending on how you want to look at it, of the light and how the light functions. They will force their will onto everyone, even those that have betrayed them or sort of worked against them. The light attacking, the fact that the Stonewright could actually stave them off, that is rather interesting to me, and something that I think speaks to the power of the light in a way. Speak to the power of the light. But we never objectively knew that was true. To be honest, their nature is so deceitful that they may not even be loyal to Denathrius. Frogcast, if the Whispers is to be believed, then the Cunning Ones kneel before 6 masters, but serve only 1. So they do actually serve Denathrius, and we know that now that Denathrius have been captured, the Nathrezim have actually risen up to come save him, right? They are actually trying to save him. Now, with all of that said, to my mind, this is not a retcon. I don't view it the same as Apocalypse. Rather, I view it as an explanation, right? And myself and Apocalypse will have this discussion on podcast next week, where we will talk and we will see. But I view this more as an explanation. I view this as an insight into what happened and how it actually happened. So how did Sargeras get the helm and the sword? We now know it was handed to him. The Nathrezim didn't steal the sword and the helm. They were tasked with taking that sword and that helm to Sargeras. So the jailer's been planning all of this at least since the creation of the Lich King, the very first one, Ner'zhul. He's been planning this entire thing. He's had this thing sort of in the back of his mind this whole time. This is what he wanted to do. Now, bigger questions arise. Did Sargeras know? Or did the Nathrezim play a very, very, very intelligent trick on him? So my mind is that the Nathrezim played a trick on him. The Nathrezim were very intelligent in this. They knew that the Titans are extremely one-track minded. They understood, right, that the Titans clearly wouldn't think past their own nose. So what did they do? Rather than taking Sargeras' gaze and turning it to a real threat, a threat that would perhaps have bothered Sargeras, they turned Sargeras' eyes, his gaze, to the one thing that would only have a single solution: the Void. They tell him that the Void is the biggest threat in all of the universe, that the old gods are there. Now, I want to make sure everyone understands this. The only reference that we have to the ultimate goals of the Void Lords and the old gods by proxy is from what was allegedly said to Sargeras. That's the only evidence we have. So, did the Nathrezim lie to Sargeras? Almost guaranteed. They told him about the Void and their sort of nefarious plan for the universe. And Sargeras' only real solution to this was to end all life in the universe. Now, who would have benefited from such a solution? Who would have claimed or reaped the rewards of a solution that involves the literal destruction of all life in the universe? The jailer. So even if his original plan doesn't work, he still has backup plans, right? Because the backup plan is he just keeps feeding life into the universe and eventually, or into the Shadowlands, and eventually when he does break free, he will use all of that life to control the universe and take over. So the Nathrezim play the perfect trick. They then hand him the sword and the helm as tools for his complicitness in this entire plan. This will help him ultimately destroy and take over Azeroth. Now, here's where things actually get a little bit interesting to me. Sargeras clearly figured out something. I don't want to say he figured out their entire plan, but Sargeras did not allow Ner'zhul a body. Instead, Ner'zhul would have the helm and the sword, but he would not be able to wield the sword. He would not be able to really achieve optimal power levels. This Sargeras stops. Sargeras makes sure that this doesn't happen. And so Ner'zhul has to take another approach. Now, it would not surprise me if we learn in the future that the Nathrezim did this on purpose. Because we're told that the Nathrezim, Ner'zhul had to sort of do everything in his power to not let the Nathrezim realize what he was ultimately up to. But if you think about Mal'Ganis was the very reason Arthas was drawn to Northrend in the first place. If not for Mal'Ganis, Arthas would have never made his way to Northrend. The jailer would have never had his champion. You see, I believe that the Dreadlords played this perfectly. They looked as if they were the ones keeping an eye on things, and they looked as if, remember, they are meant to be forged to be the ultimate infiltrators. So none of their actions can ever be trusted. Nothing they tell you can ever be trusted. In fact, I would not be surprised if Lothraxion himself doesn't work with the light. I would not be surprised if Lothraxion himself has donned the light as a way to disguise his infiltration. And that the light still has no idea that they have actually been controlled, and that they have been infiltrated, and that they are being spied on. The same could be said with Verimathras and Sylvanas. Yes, Verimathras played the part that was necessary at the time, whilst ensuring that everything plays out exactly the way that it should play out, ensuring that ultimately the goals of the jailer is realized. So in this regard, Denathrius has always been working with Zuvul. He's always been serving Zuvul in one form or another. It does, however, point to Zuvul being incredibly intelligent, understanding how to knock over one domino and then watch as the effect simply flows. So he's able to spot the pattern within the universe to almost the exact degree. How much does he need to nudge here? How much is required there? Just a little bit here, a little bit less there. And slowly but surely, all the dominoes fall so that he can become the master of the universe, or whatever it is that his plans are. To me, this is rather huge. I don't know about you guys, and I see chat is still having an argument, and Apocalypse is sort of taking over with Parascopic trying to have their own argument. But to the rest of chat that isn't involved in that argument, I would love to know, What are you guys, what are your thoughts about this? Do you find this as interesting and as big as I do? Or do you think, come on, this is boring, who gives a shit?